Hello, YouTube. The Iron Woman is what Russian writer Maxim Gorky called Maria Zakrevskaya Benkendorf-Budberg back in 1921. A mysterious woman with 3 surnames and many lives. The 20th century can be safely called the century of adventurers. The time was right for that. Centuries-old empires collapsed. New nations sprang up like mushrooms after the rain and disappeared as quickly. Revolutions brought completely unexpected political forces to power. In the midst of such an incredible turbulence of events, there were always those who could masterfully take advantage of the chaos around them. Someone was selling the Russian Winter Palace to gullible foreigners. Someone was posing as miraculously escaped princes or princesses. Someone was working for several intelligence services at once. Maria Zakrevskaya, also known as Baroness Budberg. Apparently, she was someone who was a double agent, according to at least a few researchers. Allegedly, she simultaneously worked for the USSR and Great Britain. Now it is impossible to say how it really was. But even if we omit such speculation, the biography of this woman deserves special attention. If only because the great writers of the last century, Russia's Maxim Gorky and Great Britain's H.G. Wells, went crazy with jealousy because of her. The biography of the spy Maria Zakrevskaya is full of secrets and enigmas and riddles. In addition, she loved to invent the most incredible stories about herself, and surprisingly, she was believed because maybe what she was telling was not inventions. Yes, a friend of 2 great 20th century writers, Maxim Gorky and H.G. Wells, as well as several politicians and diplomats. Maria Zakrevskaya enjoyed amazing freedom of movement through the Iron Curtain between the West and the USSR. In her old age, Zakrevskaya came up with the legend that she was a descendant of the Russian Empress Elizabeth, a relationship with Count Alexei Razumovsky. But even in her youth, she fantasized about herself, although those fantasies were more modest. Maria Zakrevskaya said that her great-grandmother was famous Russian poet Pushkin's acquaintance, the wife of the Moscow Governor-General Agrafena Zakrevskaya. In fact, as the writer Vitaly Woolf noted, it was nothing more than a coincidence of surnames. So who was this mysterious woman? Maria Ignatievna Zakrevskaya was born in 1892. She was the youngest child in the family of a prominent lawyer and senator of the Russian Empire. In one of the modern sources, it is reported that she was one of Her Imperial Majesty's maids of honor or lady-in-waiting. She spent her youth mainly abroad, so she spoke English especially good, French and German better than Russian all her life. In 1911, she became the wife of a diplomat, Countess Benkendorf. His rich and carefree life was interrupted by the Russian Revolution of 1917 and the subsequent communist takeover of power. Her husband, Ivan Alexandrovich Benkendorf, was killed by his peasants on his own estate. The Benkendorf apartments were confiscated by the Soviet government. At this time, Zakrevskaya had a whirlwind romance with the British ambassador to Russia, Robert Bruce Lockhart. But one stormy night, in September of 1918, the happy couple was arrested by the Chekists, Soviet secret police operatives. This is where the first discrepancies between the different accounts of Maria Zakrevskaya's life begin. According to Vitaly Woolf, she had nothing to do with the intelligence network that Lockhart masterfully organized in Soviet Russia. The Soviet authorities were not interested in Zakrevskaya in any way. After her release, she continued to suffer as a representative of the former exploitative classes until the Russian writer Maxim Gorky hired her as his secretary. According to Vitaly Petrov, in his book "The Secret" and his work "The Secret" in the Secret Archives magazine, the article's name was "The Betrayal of the Revolution and the Triple Spy." Lockhart used Zakrevskaya to meet with the right people and get information from them. Lockhart instilled in his beloved Mura, as many called her later and during her early life, the first skills of espionage work. After Mura's arrest, she was recruited by Felix Dzerzhinsky, head of the Soviet secret police, deputy Yakov Peters, into the Cheka, as the KGB was called in the early 1920s. As the secretary and at the same time lover, she became actually informant on Gorky for the Cheka, the secret police. In the slang of people with clean hands and a warm heart. That's how the secret police describe themselves. This was called slipping a mistress, this operation. Zakrevskaya and Gorky had a close relationship from then until the writer's death in 1936. However, this did not prevent them both from having affairs at the same time with other people. But the former imperial lady-in-waiting was motivated first of all by financial need and hopelessness to cooperate with the Cheka, the secret police of the USSR. However, all that has been said allows us to put forward a third account, namely that Zakrevskaya could have been introduced by the Red security operatives to the British diplomat and spy master to spy on him. Interestingly, Lockhart was released the day after his death and immediately began to seek Mura's release. The Chekists released Zakrevskaya 3 days later, but immediately arrested Lockhart again. He was released on September 9, and Peters personally visited him along with Zakrevskaya. In 1920, the Bolsheviks, rulers of the Soviet Union, allowed Zakrevskaya to travel abroad. The cover for the trip was her marriage to an Estonian citizen, Baron Budberg, whose last name Zakrevskaya later carried until the end of her life. Mura carried out an extremely important operation to create a favorable information background for the Soviet state in the world. She fell in love with the famous British writer H.G. Wells and convinced him to make a trip to Soviet Russia. And as a result of this trip, Wells wrote a short but famous book, Russia in the Dark, which instantly became a bestseller. The popular science fiction writer depicted the decline of civilization after the revolution in Russia, but at the same time expressed confidence that the Russian people would overcome this catastrophe and painted a vivid, sympathetic portrait of Vladimir Lenin, the dictator in the Soviet Union, as the intellectual leader of Russia. During Wells' trip to Russia, Mura was assigned to him as a translator. In fact, as an observer of the secret police, according to the Russian biographers. The relationship that began back in London continued and left a deep mark on the life of the already elderly science fiction writer. Wells and Mura had been close for many years. Wells repeatedly asked Mura to marry him, but she invariably refused. Mura Budberg became the last love of A.G. Wells, a visionary science fiction writer and publicist. 80% of his predictions, which seemed like crazy assumptions at the time, became reality in the future. In his science fiction novels, Wells foresaw the appearance of buses, escalators, answering machines, central heating, automatic doors, and many other useful inventions of the 20th century. Wells continued to express his sympathies for the USSR all his life, visiting that country once more in 1934 and again leaving a favorable review about it. Obviously, he was not privy to Soviet concentration camps, ideological indoctrination, and failed collectivist economy. After his death in 1946, he bequeathed the lion's share of his fortune to his Russian mistress. However, one should not think that the operation to attract Wells to the side of the USSR was the work of the Soviet Special Services exclusively. This is very interesting that I found in some of the biographies. During these years, while in Europe, Mura repeatedly met with Lockhart. Later, in the 1950s, she was arrested one day on suspicion of having links with agents who had been discovered and fled to the USSR. But the case against Mura was hushed up. All these years, Zakrevskaya was also close to the Russian writer Gorky. She played a big role in convincing him to finally return to the USSR in 1933. And after that, she came to him only in 1936, shortly before the death of the writer. But the mysterious disappearance of the famous writer's archives is connected with Mura. She definitely brought them back to the USSR at the request of the Soviet government. The further fate of the archives is unknown and is still being debated. There is an account that the archives were burned. According to other assumptions, they are classified as top secret in the funds of the President of the Russian Federation. Anyway, Zakrevskaya inexplicably received from the Soviet government exclusive rights to royalties from foreign editions of any Gorky works. This mysterious cosmopolitan woman visited the USSR several times between 1956 and 1968. She met with Soviet officials and dissidents and interviewed the dissidents. She lived in London, and in the early 1950s, again, she came to the attention of the British counterintelligence MI5. That's when the two Soviet agents fled to Moscow, and Mura became suspected of collaborating with the USSR Special Services. However, the case ended with just an interrogation. This fact, among others, is considered by some to be proof of Mura's work for the British intelligence services. It is known that she had the Gorky's Italian archive, but again, Mura claimed that it, along with her own archive, had burned down. Whether this is true or not, no one knows. She only revealed what she thought was necessary. And Nina Berberova, who was personally acquainted with Maria Ignatievna Zakrevskaya, argued that it was impossible to fully trust the stories of the Iron Woman. Even the date and cause of Maria Budberg's death are uncertain. It is known that she died during a visit to her son in Italy, either October 31 or November 2nd of 1974. The whole truth about the double, at least, life of Maria Zakrevskaya Beckendorf Budberg is still hidden in secret intelligence files of different countries. Again, curiously, that sometime before Zakrevskaya's death in 1974, her archive, including all personal correspondence, was completely burned down. Of course, everything can be attributed to chance, careless handling of fire, and so on. However, according to her biographers, now we will never know for sure who Maria Zakrzewska Benkendorf-Budberg really was. I will bring you more stories about the murky world of the Soviet espionage. And if you like my research, please kindly support me through the links you'll find in the description to this channel. Please like my videos and subscribe to my channel. And please make sure that you are notified of my new videos. Thank you for your attention to my work.